What's up guys, I'm back, and today I'm going to be going over the basics of creating and backing up your project with GitHub. So the first step is to install GitHub Desktop. You can do that by just going to desktop.github.com. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out there. Now that you've installed GitHub Desktop, as you can see, I have open right here. The next step is to create a repository. So you can do this both from GitHub Desktop by just going to File, New Repository, or you can do it in GitHub, the web browser, which is how we're going to do it in this tutorial. So to create a repository in GitHub Desktop browser, you want to go up to the right top-hand corner and click the plus button, and then click New Repository. Once you get to the new repository page, you want to make sure you have a repository name. We're just going to name it Test Repository. And as you can see, it's just saying your new repository will create a test-repository because they need to have no spaces. You want to add a description. This is a test repository. And then you can choose whether you want your repository to be public or private. So this is entirely up to you. If you want your repository to be public so that you can share your work to other people, you definitely want to make sure you have public selected. However, there's definitely a lot of really good reasons why you should have your repository private. If you're working on confidential information, if you're creating a project that you don't want anyone to be able to see, you don't want people to be able to steal your work, that kind of thing. Although that's like the whole point of GitHub is for open source collaboration, so that's not necessarily as big of an issue. The biggest situation where people use private, most likely, and at least my experience was with school projects, is your professors likely don't want you to post your school projects on online in the public repository. However, you can still take full advantage of GitHub's ability to back up your projects as well as working on with other people if it's a group project. And you definitely want to select private repository if that's the case, because that way you can have your code still all backed up, but everyone on the internet can't see it, and people who take the class next semester can't see it, and that kind of thing. So now to get down to the initialize this repository with options, you can select to add a README, add a gitignore, and to choose a license. So I recommend actually clicking all of these to kind of go through the basics of what these are. A README file is basically the file that is part of your project that allows you to have a more in-depth description of your project. This includes stuff like how to set up your project. Say you've created like a game and you want to share it on GitHub. You want to tell people how to download your game and how to get playing on it and that kind of thing. That would be included in the README file. You'd also want to make sure to include stuff like dependencies. Say you wrote a Python program and you use the requests library. You want to make sure to tell them that they need to install the requests library, version 0.12 or something like that. So you want to make sure to include information about how to install dependencies on your README file. So that's definitely really important. So now to get down to the gitignore file. This is also a very important file, and I recommend you include it in your project as well. So the gitignore file, as you can see, it offers a few different templates here. Basically, this file allows you to ignore certain files in your project on your local computer. This is very important because a lot of IDEs, IDEs being the development environment you use, such as IntelliJ for Java, C-Line for C. These are both JetBrains products. You can also use VS Code. A lot of these IDEs like these often have a lot of kind of like IDE specific files that the IDE used to quickly add your project straight into their interface. And you really don't need to have these on your public repository for others to see when they're trying to see what you did for the project. They're trying to see your project. They don't really need to have all your .idea files and stuff like that. And kind of to build on that is like if you're working on, for example, a Node.js project, Node.js, if you install dependencies, adds them all to the node modules folder within your project. And you don't want to have all of your dependencies on the GitHub repo because that's like sometimes millions of files, millions of lines of code, and you don't want that on your GitHub repo. So that's why it's very useful to have a gitignore, because you can just say ignore that, have instructions in your README and how to install that when someone wants to download their project, and it's much easier that way. So you want to make sure you add a gitignore. I recommend choosing whatever language you are coding in for just the basic gitignore, and then adding your own pieces when you want to ignore something specific. So we're just gonna do the Python one. And then down here for the license. So the license, obviously, it's just like the license for using your your code that's in your project. So there's a bunch of different options here. I'm definitely not an expert on which license does which license you should go with. Basically, most of them kind of go around the just general public use, like, oh, you can use this code and monetize it. Like I'm not responsible for anything wrong in the code, basically. So generally people go with these top three. I typically just go with the MIT license. If you want to look into more of the specifics of that, which I definitely recommend you do if you're actually publishing code on there that you really care about, that you're really proud of, and you want to make sure that someone's not going to steal your code and profit from it, definitely look more into that. But that's for another thing. You can go do your research on your own on that part. So now that you've set up all these settings, you want to click Create Repository, and as my browser loads, and now we have our repository right there. Look at that. Now that you created your repository, you want to make sure that your repository is on your computer, so that way you can add your code to it, start your project and get working. So there's multiple ways you can actually clone your repository to your computer. You could go just on here and hit Code on the green button and hit Open in GitHub Desktop, or, which is another alternative way, which is the way I'm going to show you, is going into GitHub Desktop that we installed earlier and hitting File in the top left-hand corner, and then clicking Clone Repository. I like this option because it allows you to see all of your repositories on your account and then select the one you want to clone, which is much easier in my opinion. If you're just in GitHub Desktop, just hop in a clone repository, pick from one of these options, and then bam, you can just have it cloned right away. So we're going to do the one that we created, which is the test repository. Right there, you just click on it. You want to make sure you choose the correct file path where you want it. I just want it in my document/programming projects folder and then the test repository. So this looks good. We click clone, and it looks, now that we're in here, it looks all set. And now if we go over here to my documents folder, I have it off screen. If I go to my programming projects folder, which I haven't opened right now, we can find the folder that was just created right here. Test repository, just created. You open it up. It has this is a hidden folder, .git folder. It has the .gitignore, the license, and the README, which is all the stuff that was in the repository online. Now that we've cloned our repository on our computer, we can start to add our code. So I created a kind of demo file right here called test.py. If we open this up with code, we can see it's just, simple function, doesn't do anything, just passes, just a basic Python file. So we want to drag this into our repository right here. This is the same one I created in the previous clip, the test-repository in my programming projects folder. So just drag that right in there. So now you can see the files in here. Great. So if we hop over to GitHub Desktop, you can see that it actually shows that I have under the change tab, that I have test.py. It has a little, has this all green, shows these changes right here. And then it's being added to my repository. However, it's not been committed yet. So to kind of go over what commits are, basically what GitHub is used for, as I mentioned earlier, is to really back up your projects as well as to collaborate with others. So commits are basically how you take a snapshot of your code to track your progress. So to kind of draw a parallel between another software you might use, if you use Google Drive with Google Docs, you can use if you click on the history button, you can see who contributed what on a Google Doc. This is very similar to Git, where you can see who contributed what based on their commits. And so basically, now that we've added our file, we've added our file right to our repository right here. However, if we go on to the repository online and we hit refresh just to show you, that file obviously isn't in our repository online. So how do we get that file into our repository online? Well, the first step is to commit the file to our local repository. So to do that, we go over here. We want to add a little a commit message in this box right here. We'll just do first commit with test.py. And then you can add further description. This message right here is limited to a certain number of characters. So if you're on characters, you can add a further description here. And so once we're ready, we can do commit to main. So we've committed it. However, if we go over here and refresh again, you can still see it's still not here. Why is that? Well, that's because you're just committing to your local repository. We haven't actually pushed to the remote repository. So as you can see on the top row right here, there's multiple buttons. You can select between the different repositories, you can change your branch, which we'll go over in a little bit, and you can push origin. So this push origin is what I was just talking about. As you can see, there's one commit that hasn't been pushed yet. If we click this button right here, push to origin, it's going to load. And then, great, it says it's been pushed. As you can see, my change right here disappeared. That's because there is no longer any difference between the local repository and the online repository. So if we go over here and hit refresh again, wow, look at that. Test.py has been added to our online repository, just like that. As you can see, it's just a little function that we created earlier. And so yeah, there you go. So that's how you get your files onto your online repository from your local repository. The next part we're going to talk about is branches. So to understand branches, you have to understand what we did when we committed and pushed in our previous clip. So if you go up to the history tab up here, you can see our commit history. So this initial commit was just the stuff we added, or when we checked off those boxes in the first clip about adding the git ignore, the license, and the readme. That was what that commit was. And then the first commit with test.py was the one we just made a minute ago. And so basically what we're doing right now is we're committing to the main branch. As you can see up here, as I mentioned in the branch tab. So if you can see in here, you can see all your different branches. Obviously, we only have a main branch right now. So the point of branches is to, there's a few different ways you can use branches. I'm going to cover the feature branch methodology, and this is my personal favorite. Basically, what it entails is whenever you want to add a new feature to your project, you want to create a branch for it. And then once you're done with the feature and it's fully tested, you then merge that branch into the main branch. So to really understand what I'm talking about, it's good to have an example. So let's create a branch. So create a new branch. We're going to name this feature, say we want to add a new function that prints out hello world. So we'll do the hello world branch. And we'll create our branch. So now if we go up to here in current branch, you can see we have two different branches. So when we created that branch, since we were selected on the main branch, we basically duplicated our main branch into a separate branch called Hello World. However, now that we're on the Hello World branch, if we commit any files to this branch, it will just be editing this Hello World branch, and the main branch will stay the same as what we had before. So to now see this, let's go ahead and edit this Hello World branch. So if we go back to over here, and we'll edit up our test.py file, or open our test.py file. So open with code, and we'll add a new function. So we'll do def hello world. We don't need to pass anything in, and we'll just do print hello world. So great, we got our function. We saved it. We'll close this out, and we'll go back over to our GitHub desktop. You can see our new change just, have all the pluses around. We added our little function right there. We're still on the hello world branch, and we can, make this commit. Add hello world function. Great. Commit to hello world. All right. So now if we go to history, we can see that we have this hello world function commit, and then we have these two other commits that we committed earlier. So in order to have this branch actually show up on your online GitHub account, because watch, if we go right here to my online GitHub account, this is where you switch branches. Right now, it just shows we have just a main branch. That's because we haven't pushed our created branch. As I mentioned before, pushing is making sure your remote repository, which is the GitHub website, is the same as your local repository. So if we go back to here and we hit publish branch, it will then publish that branch, and it also push that commit that we created. So now, if we go over here, ignore this little tab for a second, we can click on the main, and now we can see view all branches. We can see that we have the default branch, and we have your branches as well, which is the hello world branch. So if we click on this, you can see this one has our edit to add the hello world function. But if we go over here and we click on main, this in this branch, our test.py file does not have the hello world function. That's because it's on two different branches of the code. So this is very useful for creating changes where you're not sure what their effect will have on your main version of code, and you don't want to break anything with these changes. You can kind of keep your changes very isolated, but still have the benefit of committing every time you change anything. So with like rather larger feature changes, such as say you want to add a new window to your UI, but you want to make sure you commit every time you add like a text box or say add like make sure you got your images formatted correctly. You want to make sure you commit for all those things, but you want to make sure your larger feature is still separate until it's fully working. So that's basically what branches are for. There's two ways you can merge your branch. So first, you can go into GitHub Desktop, and you can go down here, choose a branch to merge with into main. You can click on that. You can choose whatever branch you want, and then click merge that branch into main. But we're not going to do that for this tutorial. We're going to talk about pull requests, which pull requests are basically making a request to pull in a branch into another branch. And in our example, we're going to be pulling in the Hello World branch into the main branch. So basically what we're doing right here, if you just click merge, is kind of skipping the whole like request step and just jumping straight to the merging part. But it's good practice to create a request before you do that, especially when you're working on a project with other people, because then they can review your pull request and they can see what changes you have to make sure you get a second pair of eyes or even multiple pairs of eyes looking at that request before you merge it with the main part of the code. So let's do that. As I mentioned earlier, if we go back to the just main test repository, I was like, oh, just ignore this yellow part. This is GitHub telling you that you have a branch with recent pushes that is not currently synced up with the main branch. So it actually conveniently does a compare and pull request button right here, which you want to click. And this brings you to a page where you can customize your pull request before creating it. And so for us, we're going to do add hello world functionality. We'll do it in terms of pretending I did more work than just made a simple function that just printed out hello world. So add hello world functionality. You always want to have this in present tense in a pull request. That's typically best practice when you're writing pull requests. So you want to say like add, it's very simple change, add hello world function that prints hello world. Because this is a request, you want to like word it like this. You wouldn't want to write like added hello world function because you haven't added it yet because it hasn't been merged into your main part of code. So you always want to make sure this is present tense. So yeah, you add the description, you add the title. You can add reviewers if you want. There's also no one going to be here because I don't have any collaborators on my project. You can add assignees that you can add now. I guess I'll add myself. You can add labels. Say this is enhancement. Projects. This is for the Kanban, mainly for the Kanban board and for better organization. I won't go too in depth about that. I'd say that's more like advanced GitHub stuff that you really don't have to know to do the basics of GitHub. There's also milestones you can add. I won't go too much into that either. That's kind of similar to projects. And then you can link to issues. I will talk a little bit about issues in the next clip, and I'll talk about how you can link those. So we won't focus on those too much now. So if you scroll down, you can actually see what commits you have on this branch that are different from the main branch or the branch you're merging to. And you can see just this, just our hello world function commit where we got that as we saw earlier. One file change, 0 comments, 1 contributor, the basics. So up here is where you want to make sure this is correct. This is the base branch. That's where you want to be merging your branch into. And then this is the hello world branch, the branch we want to merge into our base branch. And so this is all set for us now, but it gets a little bit more confusing. Once you have multiple branches, you want to make sure you want to select the right one. So now that we're ready, we can hit create pull request. And once that loads, this is our pull request. As you can see, it's pretty basic. The main thing to focus on here is this part right here where it says this branch has no conflicts with the base branch. So if you do have conflicts where, for example, you had a version of the code on the branch that you're trying to merge into that directly conflicts with the code you're trying to add, so you edit like the same function. This can often happen when multiple people are working in the same file. That might lead to a merge conflict. We won't talk about that too much here because that's more advanced Git. It's a little trickier to work with, but I can do a follow-up video if that's requested as well. Since we have no conflicts, we don't have to worry about that. We just want to merge our pull requests. Clicking this button is the same as clicking that merge branch button down here that I was clicking on earlier, and that I was showing earlier. So if we click merge pull request and then hit confirm merge, we have pull request successfully merged and closed. Great. So if we go back to our just main repository page, we're on the main branch now. We can go over to the hello world branch, and we're going to ignore that. We're going to go back to the main branch, and we can click on our test.py file, and now we can see on our main branch, as you can see right here, we have our hello world function that was only on our hello world branch before. So that's basically how merging your branch works. So there's one more operation I want to go over before we get into GitHub issues. So as you remember, we merged our hello world branch into main. If we go back to GitHub desktop and we navigate to make sure that we have the current branch as main, we can see that it gives us the option to pull. That's because if we go to our code real quick, if we just open up our file, we can see that once we open this up, we can see that we still don't have that hello world function here, despite being on the main branch that has been merged. That's because the version that's on the remote server, on this GitHub server, is only on the remote server. It's not on our local server yet. So those changes haven't been pulled over yet. So basically what we're talking about is the pull operation. And you can see there's the pull origin button up here, which basically performs that get pull operation. So if we do that, get pull, we can now see, if we go back over to our code, that our hello world function is now here because it has pulled the remote server version of our branch onto the local server. So that's the basics of Git pulling. Basically, you'll need to do Git pulling every time the remote server is more up to date than your local server. So this happens a lot when you're working with other people. If they, make changes, push them to the remote server, obviously you're not going to have those changes on your local server. So you got to make sure to pull before you make any changes on your end. Okay, the last part of GitHub I wanted to briefly cover was issues. So if you go to the Issues tab next to the Code tab on the top on your main repository page, you can see we have an Issues page. Basically what issues are for, just to give a brief overview, is when you create an issue, you're doing it to kind of, it's like a note or like a sticky note you're putting on your project to say, hey, you should do this. Like, oh, this is an idea I have. I want to add an enhancement, say like add, say hello to a dog functionality or something like that. And then you want to add, let's say, a label, enhancement. Great. So you'd want to leave more comments. You can add it there, submit new issue. Bam. Now we have if you go back to the issues page, we've got an enhancement suggestion saying add, say hello to dog functionality. So basically you're adding notes to your project. This is very useful when you're working on a large open source project and other people can add, say they run into a bug while using your software. They could hop in here, say hello doesn't work in Linux environment or something like that. They'd be like, oh, this is a bug. Add a label, throw the bug label on there, submit new issue. Now, myself as the repository owner will see this. If I go to the Issues tab, and it's like, oh, there's a bug, I should check that out. So I go in here. Obviously, you'd want to have, they should probably add a description here, which really details more into how they ran into this bug, and I would look into that and be able to see that. So this is issues are definitely very useful, and they're pretty basic. They're basically just sticky notes on your project of things you should look at or add in the future and that kind of thing. All right, well, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them as soon as I can. If you have any suggestions about how I should be doing this video in the future, if there's something I should really focus on more, or definitely if you have any suggestions or requests for future videos about different topics about Git, I'm happy to do more videos on it. If you want me more into depth about merge conflicts, as well as maybe something like rebasing, or even stuff about like the insights and the security and that kind of thing, I'll be sure to go into that if it's requested. But anyway, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like. If you haven't subscribed already, as always, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with my content. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.